So recently, I got the wild hair to go ahead and redo my studio. You're going to see more and more videos about the equipment that I use because I find that a lot of the videos on YouTube don't really include the kind of things that I'm looking for. There's a lot of benchmark tests and things showing you the latest and greatest updates to some form of a plugin, but for me, what I'm looking for is the nitty-gritty. What do I absolutely need to make this work for me? So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you today why I upgraded my MacBook Pro to an M4 Max over my M1 Max. Prior to owning the M1, I was using a 2016 MacBook Pro with an Intel processor. And at the time, I thought it was just amazing. It was so fast and so feature rich. One thing I missed was it actually had 4 USB ports instead of the 3 that the modern ones do, but that's a different story. So recently I started updating all of the equipment in my studio, putting up new sound panels, new coat of paint, new carpet, and I want to share with you some of the practical things that I've been doing to really up my workflow, both as a musician and as a video content creator. One of my big updates recently was I finally replaced my M1 Max MacBook Pro with an M4 Max MacBook Pro. Now, one of the interesting things I've been seeing as I've been watching tons of YouTube videos about why you would want the M4 regular, not the M4 Max or MacBook Air because you don't really need all the extra power, is why would you want an M4 Max? So today I'm going to show you some of the practical applications of having the M4 Max versus having just a standard MacBook Pro. Now, for those of you who are wondering, the number one reason why I would always buy a MacBook Pro over a MacBook Air has nothing to do with the processors. It is literally the ports. I cannot stand to use a dongle if I can help it. I am driven absolutely bonkers by having to have one more thing taking up a USB port when I could just as easily plug the HDMI cord right into the side of the laptop. The MacBook Pro has a headphone out, HDMI port, 3 Thunderbolt ports, as well as the power adapter. If you go with the MacBook Air, you get 2 Thunderbolt ports and a power adapter. And to me, when I think about my standard workflow, I have an audio interface, I have an external hard drive, and then I have some kind of connection to an external monitor or something like that. And that's a minimum of 3 ports. So whenever I'm thinking about a computer, that's the first thing I'm thinking about. And so that's why I always get MacBook Pros over the more consumer-grade MacBook Airs and such. The reason I went with the M4 Max was I was a little afraid of that I'd be missing out on some sort of performance thing over the Pro, but I didn't understand what it was I was missing. I watched tons of videos about people saying, oh, you need tons of RAM to load virtual instruments. But then I thought, well, I don't actually use that many virtual instruments. I mostly use analog plugins. Also in my video workflow, I kept watching videos where people were editing 4K videos in multicam environments on a regular M4, not even the Pro, with great playback. And I thought, well, what in the world does the Max do then? And then the final nail in the coffin is when I got home and I plugged in my M4 Max and I put it next to my M1 Max, I noticed no difference. And I thought, oh my goodness, did I just spend thousands of dollars and get virtually nothing? Now, if you go online and you look at things like the Cinebench scores and Geekbench and all these other things, you might be lured in with these giant numbers. You might also get confused of why on the PC version the numbers are huge compared to the ones on the Mac. And frankly speaking, none of those numbers really matter for daily workflow. It is true that according to that test, one of these computers is faster than the other, but it's not actually a test that really means a whole lot to most of us. For me, my workflow consists of using multicam clips and or Final Cut Pro to edit videos, using Logic or Pro Tools to work on large album-size audio projects, as well as other high computer things like doing Photoshop, Lightroom, and things like that. I don't do 3D rendering, so a lot of the GPU and things that some of these programs like Cinebench measure for really don't apply to my workflow that much. But there are a couple of specs that people don't talk about when it comes to the M4 Max versus the M1 and why you might actually want to make this upgrade. So for those of us out there who are doing audio projects, Mac has a really cool feature which is RAM compression. Now, what is RAM compression? Basically, what RAM compression is, whenever there's something that's loaded into RAM that's used by a program, but it's not actively being read from, the computer will actually take that data, it will compress it, and that way it's taking up less of your actual RAM before it has to go into what they call swap, which is writing things to the internal SSD. But the nice thing about the compression feature is it actually goes about 4 times faster than your internal SSD does, which means any data that's compressed in there versus put into swap is so much faster. And the computer can literally, in less than a second, pretty much compress the entirety of your RAM load and convert it over to free space for another program to use it. So all of this amounts to the fact that even though we only have 36 gigs of RAM on this particular MacBook Pro, I'm not really hindered by the RAM amount for 99% of what I do. Frankly speaking, I never knew what the more RAM would do, and I still can't quite figure it out, because if I had 128 gigabytes of RAM, programs would use more of it for sure, but I'm not sure I would notice the difference unless I was doing something humongous. To be clear, for your standard audio project, whether you're in Pro Tools, Apple Logic, or any of these others, you're probably not going to be touching the RAM that often. Now, if you are going to use huge AI plugins, or you're going to load 1,000 instances of a virtual instrument, that's where you're probably going to run into RAM problems. But these are not normally the things you're going to notice. And the specs on a lot of these computers are somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 simultaneous tracks at once, which is way more than most of us use. I cap out around 20, and so I'm coming nowhere near the benchmark of my computer. The second reason you might be interested in the Max over the M4 or the M4 Pro is memory bandwidth. What this means is how quickly can the computer move memory from the SSD into RAM. Now, this is a direct relation to how quickly the computer can do larger tasks. Let's face it, opening Safari, loading Google takes almost no memory bandwidth at all, so you'll never really notice a performance increase. But if you're going to copy a huge file off of your internal SSD, if you're going to do a rendering project or anything like that, that's when you're really going to notice the memory bandwidth. Now, in the M4, there are 4 classifications. You have the regular M4, you have the M4 Pro, you have the M4 Max with the 14 core, which is what I purchased, and then you have the M4 Max with the 16 cores, which is the fastest. Now, you'll see down here in the table, the difference between the M4 and the M4 Maxes is quite substantial. And like I said, if you're just loading up a web page, or if you're running even a simple video game, you're probably not going to see any huge benefit. But when you start doing playback of multiple angles and things like that, that's when you're going to start chewing through this memory bandwidth. And the other one is render time, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Now, it is true that the M4 Max has more cores of all varieties, both GPU and CPU, than the other versions. But those are really not well utilized by most of us. Now, this is not to say that Apple doesn't use them. It's just that I don't use them. You can see here in this video, I'm doing a render of a movie from Final Cut Pro that includes color grading and multiple angles, but you can see I'm not even using all of my cores or all of my GPU cores, and it's going faster than real time by about 3 times. I also want to note, do you see how little processor power we're using? We're using about 7% of our total processor load. And by the way, I'm doing a screen capture and recording audio in Logic simultaneously. So none of this is even coming close to peaking out the power of the computer. The reason that this is true is the M4 Max actually has a secret weapon that is not available in the Pro or in the regular M series, which is dual video encoders. Now, on my previous MacBook Pro, I could play back pretty much any of these projects pretty close to what you're seeing here. I really had no playback problems or memory bandwidth problems. but the export times were definitely higher, and it used a lot more of my computer's RAM and processor power. But on the M4 Max processor, the computer's processor is not actually doing the encoding. It's actually sending it over to these dual processors that are doing their specific job, and they do it incredibly well, which means I'm using less battery, less electricity, and far less of my computer resources. Literally speaking, because I'm using so little of my computer's power, I could be literally watching a movie, doing anything else while this is exporting, and I probably wouldn't even notice the difference, and it's not really slowing it down. I did the exact same test with the screen recording off, and it exported in the exact same amount of time. So not only is it really not affecting the computer at all, it's making the computer so efficient because while it's exporting this project, I can be doing other things, which means not only does it export the movie faster, but I literally have zero downtime. I can go from one project to the next, and I don't lose any workflow time. One of the biggest reasons I upgraded to the M1 Max years ago was because I needed to reclaim some of my downtime. It would be so tragic to be having to wait for a 30-minute render while I was desperately trying to get more work done. And now the M4 Max means I have almost no downtime, which is pretty incredible. The other upgrades is that you get the Thunderbolt 4 or 5 with the newest versions. Now, the reason this is so impressive is it because it allows us to use internal SSDs in enclosures. And believe it or not, this little enclosure that I got for around $60 to $80 on Amazon is faster than the internal memory of my MacBook Pro. So I can buy, for a fraction of the cost, a 1, 2, 4, or 8 terabyte SSD module, stick it inside of this little unit that actually has a cooling fan built in, plug it in, and now I'm getting faster read and write speeds, and I don't have to pay the extra thousands of dollars to Apple. So with the combination of the SSD and the actual MacBook M4 Max, my workflow increased a humongous amount. So if you're still using one of the older Macs, they still work great. They're still very performance oriented, but this is a way of getting a huge amount of performance increase. And once you understand what it is you're paying for when you get the M4 Max, it takes a little bit of the sting out of it. Because let me tell you, I had a little bit of buyer's remorse for about 30 seconds when I realized I had no actual performance increase during playback and editing in Final Cut Pro between my M1 and my M4. And I thought, what in the world are they doing? And then I finally figured out why and how you get that performance increase. So a quick synopsis is you're getting a faster processor, more memory bandwidth, you're getting those dual video encoders, and you're getting one of the best energy efficient processor units that you can get. So I hopefully you found this video useful. I'm going to be giving you some more information about my studio, about the equipment I use, my cameras, my microphones, and everything else to make my Dorico videos, my music videos, as well as just literally recording the music that I release to Spotify and whatnot. Again, if you have questions, please put them down there in the comments. I love engaging with people, as well as if you'd like to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. I've got some affiliate links down there for some musical gear if you're so inclined. And thanks so much for watching.